Hello again, and welcome to the second episode of mm, the learning curve. The Sorry if I'm a bit unclear at times. My throat's a bit iffy, but hey. So in the last video, I built this, a nigh indestructible slab of steel, and this time it's actually going to become slightly less effective. But that is the risk that a robot runs if it's a tutorial as opposed to purely a competitive machine. Because I want to fit as many things as possible into the build to teach you. So what we're going to be doing today is adding a spinning weapon on this back panel here. Oh, well, sticking out of this panel. There are two ways that you could go about doing that. The first would be to add a vertical blade coming out of the middle of it. Kind of like Roadblock, if anyone remembers the early series of Robot Wars. The way that I'm going to be doing it, though, partly because it's more mechanically interesting, so there's more to learn, and partly because you can get a bigger weapon, so you can get more power behind it, is I'm going to be doing a horizontal weapon. I could attempt to squeeze this 10 kilo flywheel into it somehow, but that's dumb because it's just too big for this shape, and it's too big for a machine that's supposed to have some other stuff put in it later as well. So what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be showing a bit of custom weapon work as well, because I'm going to be doing a small bar spinner. So first thing you're going to need is the motor that takes up the least space. So that's this one. Not the motor that's the shortest from end of axle to end of axle. And next is, well, we need to figure out how exactly is best to squeeze things in. And the reason that I've built the robot the way it is without considering this weapon is sort of as a bit of an extra tutorial on space management, because in here you can already see there's no room at all for this weapon. But well, first I'm going to move everything out of the way, except for the wheels, because these are where we're going to be making some more space in the back. Because if I take one of these motors and looking at the axes down here, you're going to want to actually manually type to get just the right angle, and then you can pull this all the way over here, drop it down a little bit. There's going to be some precise manoeuvring of that needed in a minute. Guess we're going to then take a 90-degree gearbox, which is one of these, and stick that on the end of this motor. Rotate it around, individually copy the wheel from the other side, and we once again have a wheel. And now is where the precise manoeuvring of things comes in, because we want to get this. It doesn't need to be exactly right, but it needs to be as close as I can. It needs to be still fitting reasonably within that back end, and not having the motor sticking out of the front wedge. And so, once again, I'm going to need to basically do a bit of moving around with these axis arrows, as I was just doing, to check the scale of things, essentially, and then I can change the numbers precisely to get something in between the different results that I'd have got just working with the that I've got just working with the sorry, I'm really not doing well on the words because I'm trying to build the robot at the same time. The okay, I'll stop now. And so basically these things can't be relied on to be precise enough for most applications. They can do the basic sort of start work. You can use them to get an approximation of what you want, but if you need to be precise, you need to use the numbers down the side here. There. Now I can move on to the next bit and actually be paying attention to what I'm doing without trying to explain something that has far too many words to cover while doing other things. And here I can click from one to the other and match the I can click from one to the other and match the individual numbers in order to get a exact, precise mirror of the position. Then I just need to swing this around, lean it over until it looks about right. It needs to be between those, just like the other one was, and boom, we have the drive motors no longer taking up anywhere near as much space in the back of the machine. That leaves us free to fit in the motor for the weapon. Now, one thing to note here is that there is going to be in some designs potentially a lot more fiddling things around to try and make space, and in this particular case, well, it's not exactly much of a spoiler. In the next video I'm going to be giving this robot a flipper, and so this position for the drive motor on the weapon at the back is not going to be viable. It is just going to take up all of the space the flipper could have been in. So I'm going to need to do something a little bit convoluted, but it's a good it's a good opportunity for demonstrating some of the kind of tricks that you might want to use in order to effectively, in order to basically have more space at disposal inside the robot than you really reasonably should. So I'm going to need another 90-degree gearbox. Flip that the other way up. But what I'm going to need now is to take a second transmission in the form of a pulley. And this is something that you can only do if you're playing the bleeding edge builds of the game, which you can find on you can find on some of the comments on the game page. I recommend backing up your robot files before you before you try switching to a bleeding edge build. I haven't had any problems switching over to this, but you never know how things are going to react on an individual PC or Mac or whatever. So yeah, ideally you want to make sure that you do have a backup copy of all of your robot files. I will link in the description the tutorials for how to do that, as well as, actually it's probably easier if I just link the bleeding edge builds in the description as well. Weirdly, the video that I'm gonna do later on how to do spinners properly is probably actually going to be simpler than this one. So now that we have our motor and our pulley, we can now drag the other end of the pulley out here and start figuring out the exact alignment of everything. What I'm going to need to do is pull this motor further in so that we can get the pulley, if you go onto the numbers, set X to 0, that pulley is now dead in the centre of the robot, and I'm going to pull it by gradually lowering the number on the Z axis. Well, by technically raising it because it's negative, the number on the Z axis, until that pulley belt is at the minimum amount of space that it can possibly have. So here we have our pulley. And onto this, I'm going to be adding a lightly customized bar. So what I'm thinking is do a little bit of the sort of thing that you get on some of the on some of the bigger, fancier bars. Not too much, just a bit. And with this shape, it's going to be the smaller one of those points that actually hits the opponent. The larger one trailing behind is just there to give some extra weight at the head. And that is well, something that I'll be getting onto in much greater detail in a future video, because I'm going to at some point be doing one on how to make an effective bar. Now, these may all look viable, but what I'm doing there is basically checking whether there's any that don't have quite so much intersecting, just to avoid confusion in the game. But it looks like there isn't one, so I'm going to get a symmetrical one instead. Just to guarantee that it's definitely actually, evenly weighted. Then we're going to get that bar attached. Reset the position to something easy to work with. And then we can go into size and start making it into something that we can actually use. This looks good. I'm going to drop it down into the pulley. Well, into the end of the pulley, I should say. Just partly to make more efficient use of the space, and partly for the sake of realism, because you'd want your bar not to be sticking out on some tiny little flimsy axle. Oh, it has just occurred to me that if I do that, then it'll be intersecting with... No. What's also just occurred to me while I was realising that is that in real life you could cut off the other end of that pulley if it was getting in the way of the bar. So you just need the bar not to be hitting the full body of the pulley, which it won't be here, although you probably want just a little bit more clearance. And so now we have the weapon. We can get to work on squeezing things like power back into the robot. That is not quite clear, so I can go in and change the x-axis just slightly. The name of the game here is maximising how efficiently you use the space available. You're basically playing Robot Tetris. So I want to move this further over to the side there and back it as far as possible into the space there next to the weapon motor. Keep all the weight back where the wheels are, and I'm keeping more space available to put the flipper into. Then I can just drop these back down. That's too far. And these get back into the robot. Yeah, on the front of not clipping things through other parts, the best rule that I've come across is if things seem if you're concerned at any point about an axle that isn't being used, then don't worry about it too much, because in real life you could cut it off, like the other end of this pulley axle here. So with the reinsertion of our RC receiver, keeping lots of space in the middle to future-proof this time, we have our robot now with a weapon at the tail, and we're going to want to make that weapon out of steel so that it can actually hit hard. But you may notice that we are now drastically overweight. That isn't something to worry about quite yet. Oh. That, on the other hand, is something to worry about, because that is vulnerable. So I'm going to have to shift that up slightly. Yeah, so we're overweight, but that isn't a primary concern just yet, because what we need to worry about right now is the fact that we've got the weapon pulley sticking right out of the back of the robot, which doesn't make for very good support. It doesn't matter as the game stands at the moment, but again, this tutorial is sort of the tutorial itself is sort of future-proofed for when the game advances further. So I'm just gonna stick a supporting part on the back of the robot to hold up the... That is way too far! Yeah, stick that out the back of the robot just to hold up the pulley. It's not the best thing aesthetically, but it'll do for this bare bones sort of robot. And now we can worry about weight. And the easiest way to reduce weight is to make some of the armour thinner, which is why I expect that this robot is actually going to be a little bit less capable than it was in its weaponless form. Just getting everything nice and symmetrical there, but that does mean that I can potentially get away with an extra kilo somewhere. Not quite. Well, yeah. But within 1 kilo of the weight limit. It's not like I'm missing out much on armour that it could have had while still having the weapon. But now we want to go to controls. Make sure that everything looks about right. I'm gonna stick the weapon motor on a toggle switch on space.
Yep.
Oops, sorry. Been soothing my throat with strawberry and watermelon tango, so yeah, a little bit of gas going on. The speaking of that, it's delicious. If you find it, you should try it. Anyway, I like to put my spinners on a toggle switch when they are single direction spinners, so that I can just switch it on and leave it. Especially if they're spinners that are going to be on a robot that has multiple weapons, because once this bot has a flipper as well, I'll be using space for the flipper, but I'll be able to change the spinner to Z, and then I can just hit Z at the start of the fight, and then unless I'm being flipped around, I don't need to worry about it after that. But let's drive. The robot steers properly, albeit it moves a little bit slower than it did without the gearboxes. And okay, the weapon spins the wrong way, so I'm going to have to reverse that. But now the weapon spins the right way, and with it spinning, the gyro effects from it actually make the robot steering a little bit lighter. And as you can doubtless tell from these cones, lightweight targets really aren't going to be a problem for this spinner. As you may also be able to tell from this 20-odd kilos of featherweight robot here, on the rare occasions that the spinner actually hits it. It's a little bit high. Meanwhile, 100 kilo crate there. Okay, the spinner, as one would expect, when it's only 2.5 kilos, doesn't have the impact to send that crate very far, but it will damage the crate. Oh, game crashed the desktop. That happens when you're attacking crates with that crate with spinners. Still, not crashed to desktop, crashed to menu, but still, on the plus side, that does speed up the process of getting back out here to put the robot back into further testing. So we can see whether the spinner actually does much damage. You may notice Roll Robbie actually has taken damage already. That's because when it spawns, it overhangs the flame pit. And while this weapon doesn't hit particularly hard, it's more of a bitey weapon. It's more of a scratchy weapon than a bitey weapon, which, well, frankly, I'm not even slightly surprised by, given given the weight of it. But it is doing far more damage than this robot was ever capable of doing before. Ow! I've had my weapon stamped on. One tactic that I'm trying to test out here, it's not particularly easy to pull off, is to get under him and drive all the way under to the other side and have him drop down on the weapon. Managed to get him to drop down on it there, and such things don't do all that much damage, but you can see that the weapon is... It is doing harm to him. Considerably more harm than the robot did before. while I'm at this, I should probably test out whether the robot still stands up to damage as well as it used to, and whether it still... oh well, it won't stand up as well as it used to, but whether it still stands up at all. And what better way to test that than with 104 kilos of melty brain flywheel. The answer appears to be yes, it does still stand up to it. It's not taking the initial big points of damage that Circulectrum normally does. So yeah, it is still actually quite tough. So the last thing to test, which frankly these battles are mostly just for the sake of this video not just being building a robot, but the last thing to test is whether it is still a nightmare to flip, or whether it's actually gotten easier to do that. Okay, so staying still does still result in it going up on Manta, but driving towards it, Manta can't properly get under it. And if I can get it to actually stay on its back, I'm going to switch to it for this one and hope that the AI can manage to actually flip me. Gonna go with Earthquake. Just because the AI, I've noticed since the last video, the AI does actually seem, out of all the flippers, to be best at driving Earthquake. There we go, I'm over. Now, if I can not just be flat against a wall. See, this is the problem with relying on the AI to help you test something. What I'm trying to show is, well, partly show, partly find out, is how the weapon is how effective the weapon is when the robot itself is upside down, so the weapon is lower down. Unfortunately, the AI is not cooperative at all. So I can give him my unprotected tail as much as I want. He won't just flip me over. He will always just slam me against the wall and hold me there. And he'll only ever fire his flipper again when I'm about to be... or when he starts being counted out. New plan. Flip me. Flip me. Just come on, come on. Get off the pit. Will you get off the pit and flip me? The AI in this game. I mean, there's... Okay, this isn't an option that I, oh well, this isn't a particularly convenient option to do, but sorry, it's it's going to be the only way to actually test this by the look of things. Just flip it over and then take it into battle that way. This video has been extended quite a bit by my attempts to test this out with the using the capabilities of the AI. This thing is, with the angle the weapon is now at, it's going to be a really weird one to attack with, because you can see that it's going to bounce up off of the wedge every time. But if it's given the opportunity to catch the sides, it can still sort of do some damage. So it's certainly a weird weapon. It's not a practical weapon fitting at all, but the purpose of this robot has never been to be practical. The purpose of this robot is to be an exercise in game mechanics, so that you can learn how to design a robot. Oh well, not how to design it, but so that you can learn how to build a robot, and then apply that to your own designs. And there goes Faust over onto its back, proving, as I have seen many times, why Faust needs buffing, because it really just does not work effectively in its current state in the game. It's either not as stable as it's supposed to be, or the arm doesn't move as fast as it's supposed to, and I can't tell which one. All I can tell is that once it falls onto its back, it's a bit useless, and it falls onto its back a bit too easily. Anyway, that's been an that's been an eventful few fights to try and demonstrate the weapon. It's not, as I've said, it's not the most effective weapon, but what I was teaching you there is the ways of actually attaching things to your robot. And yeah, in future I'll be doing more in-depth videos on individual weapon types. So in the video on spinners there, I'll be able to show more of what actually makes a good spinner. There are a lot of different types, and there are only a few really outstanding examples of each. Anyway, that's off topic. After fiddling around with that for a while, bye.